All right, welcome everybody. What time is it? 1600, about 4:12 here on the 28th of September, and we did a live yesterday talking about Hassan Nasrallah and his potential killing, and it came out this morning that he was killed in that strike by the IDF, by Israel yesterday in Lebanon, in Beirut, when they dropped 6 buildings. And I said yesterday on the live that I thought we would come back here today and maybe give you a couple of more points, a couple of more things to consider now that he's no longer with us and what's going to happen in the future. So that's what I'm going to do here this afternoon. Now, I'm also going to add this as an extra to the podcast. So you'll see that at the website headlinesandhistory.com. I'm also going to throw it up on YouTube, but we're going to call it the 10 points because I've got 10 topics here, 10 things I want to talk about that I think everybody should consider that now that Nasrallah is no longer with us. There's a lot of stuff online. There's a lot of discussions happening, as you might imagine. I want to clear up some of the confusion. And I also just want to give you a couple of quick takes here based on my, as we say, law enforcement training and experience, and what I think may happen in the coming days, coming weeks, and again, some of the context here. And so the first thing that I want to mention, so we're going to talk about 10 points. The first one that I want to mention is something called catastrophic success. This is this thing we deal with in the military relatively often. When you have a planning, when you go through planning, when you do MDMP, when you do the military decision-making process, you try to assess, you try to predict what's going to happen when your mission is ongoing. You try to predict that if I do A, B, and C, then D will occur, or at least D is most likely to occur. Potentially E could occur, right? But sometimes what happens, what planners like to think about is, what if it doesn't work? What if I put together this plan? The CG has a commanding general blesses off on it. This is what we think is going to happen. What if it doesn't happen? Right? That's one thing that's often considered by planners. One thing that's not often considered, and we can call that catastrophic failure. One thing that is not often considered is catastrophic success. What happens if you are so successful that you get out over your skis and you're ahead of the game? You are ahead in your timeline. Maybe you made it through the enemy when you had predicted it would be 24 to 48 hours, and then you made it through the enemy in 8, right? What are you going to do with the plan at that point? Because everything changes. Your collection plan changes. Your supporting element operations change off of your main element. This is something that could be happening to Israel right now. They have had catastrophic success from a counterterrorism standpoint over the last couple of weeks. It started with Hamas, and they've been relatively successful going into Gaza. But then they definitely turned on the catastrophic success when you consider what's happened to Hezbollah. I mean, within 72, 96 hours, the Israeli Defense Forces have been able to just completely eliminate all of the senior leadership within Hezbollah, right? And to include all the way up to Nasrallah, as we're talking about here today. So Israel has to be able to plan accordingly and be prepared for what can happen now if they're out over their skis. Now, what I will say is it is something that's considered in planning sometimes. I don't think this is going to catch Israel. I really don't. I think Israel is pretty darn good at what they do. And I just have this intuition that Israel knows what it's doing, and it knows and it has in mind what it needs to do now that Nasrallah is gone, right? But certainly something you can consider. I'm not saying that's 100%, right? Israel could get over their skis. We'll talk a little bit about that, about a ground incursion into Lebanon. But nonetheless, I think they're good enough to have planned for some catastrophic success. Let's hope that's the case. Sometimes it doesn't. Now, let's go to some tweet stuff that's coming through. I'll share this on my screen, and I want to highlight a couple of points from my page here that I've been going through and discussing and taking some notes on that I think are relevant here for our conversation. So this is going to be point number 2 about the Ayatollah. If you can see on the screen here, it says the Supreme Leader. This is put out by one of the pages that I follow. You can see the Supreme Leader of Islamic Republic of Iran, Khamenei, has been transferred to a secure location, fearing that Israel could strike him next. Listen, Israel is not going to attack the Ayatollah in Tehran. It's just not going to happen. Okay. Uh, Nasrallah is a terrorist, somewhat of a political leader, right? There's some of that element going on in Lebanon, and Hamas, that's a terror element. Listen, terror is a term that's used by some but not by others. Right? You can call them freedom fighters, insurgents, depends on how you want to look at them, right? But what they aren't are sovereign states. That's what they're not. Right? Even if you have some of the Hezbollah members in parliament, in the legislative branch in Lebanon, and they're participating in the day-to-day politics of Lebanon, they're still not the leader of a sovereign state. Right? The sovereignty of Lebanon is with the Lebanese government as a whole. It's with the president. It's with the prime minister. And that's the case for the Ayatollah. So maybe the Ayatollah is being taken from a security standpoint to some location where he thinks he's going to be more secure. That's possible. I'm not bemoaning that, or I'm not claiming that that isn't the case. It could be. But what isn't going to happen is Israel's not going to strike in Tehran and kill the Ayatollah. It's just not. If there were any time in history when Israel had wanted to do that. There were plenty of opportunities in the past when the Ayatollah had done something that would have upset Prime Minister Netanyahu, as an example, in any time that he was in power, not just now. And so, what would make now any different? It's that is, we talk about these red lines, all these this proverbial red lines all the time. That's a red line that's just not going to be crossed. All right, they are not going to kill the Ayatollah. We'll just leave it at that. So maybe he's going to go away for security, but that's just not going to be on Israel's radar. I can guarantee you that. Right. So point number 3, immediate success. You can see it here on the screen as well. Immediate success. And I mean this from a political standpoint for Lebanon. You can see here that a cargo flight from Iran was supposed to land at the Beirut airport, has turned around, and Israel informed the air traffic control at the airport that Israel would launch airstrikes against the plane if it landed in Beirut. Israel is well aware that the IRGC is often sending airplanes with cargo into Lebanon all of the time. I mean, how do you think Hezbollah gets its money, its fighters, its supply, its weaponry? They get it from Iran, sometimes on the ground, a lot of times through the air. And when Hezbollah is in charge, or let me say that differently, when Hezbollah has authority, when it's at its full peak of strength a month ago, right, 6 weeks ago, they have enough sway within the government that if Iran wants to send a cargo plane and it wants to land in Beirut, it will, and nobody's going to say otherwise. Okay, but now that you've literally lost all of the senior membership within your organization, and many of them are involved in the legislative affairs, now you get an opportunity where the Lebanese government can step back in and go, listen, we're not really being held as much as hostages, if you will, in the way that it has been over the last X amount of years since Hezbollah's been around, right? Nasrallah came in 92, but Hezbollah's been in since 82. And, Lebanon can step up and say, hey, listen, I can have more authority and say, listen, I'm not interested in any more of this IRGC weaponry coming in just after Nasrallah has been executed. Okay. Now, that it could also be some element of this could be that Israel is in such a place militarily that it's not going to deal with any further Iranian imports into Lebanon at this point, right? They're at such a high peak, right, in terms of their operational status, that they're just not going to let anything happen. It could potentially be that true, where Israel literally reached out and said, Lebanon, not happening, knock it off. But if I'm thinking optimistically, if you're thinking optimistically, I would say that it's a good time. There's an opportunity here for the Lebanese government to kind of stand up, bolster itself a little bit, and say, you know what, we're going to retake this this political authority here in Lebanon now that Hezbollah is in complete and utter disarray rather. Okay, so that's an optimistic point here. Now, point number 4. Let's go tactical here. What you've seen over this morning, if you've been paying attention, is that there are continued strikes against munition centers, munition depots all over southern Lebanon, and that's continued after it was pointed out, after it was verified, rather, this morning that Nasrallah was in fact dead, and he had some other senior leaders that were with him. So that is the case, and what it's a continuance of what Israel needs to do in order to prep the battle space, right? It's two part in a sense. You can make the claim that Israel is continuing to reduce the amount of munitions that Hezbollah has been stockpiling for decades, and really since after 2006, when the last major conflict was. And so now that the leadership's gone, Israel is going to continue to get rid of the munitions. It could be that in and of itself, right? There's logic to that, but I would say that in my experience, it's also a continuation of battle space prep. I do think whether it's a smart or not so smart political move, it's a smart or not so smart diplomatic geopolitical move for Israel to go into Lebanon on the ground. I would lean towards the idea that they will. I would lean towards that. That's a bet I would make. Again, just from the top of my head, and so I think they're continuing. Again, I think they're continuing to prep the battle space. So I think that's what you're seeing here this morning. That's point number 4. What can the Ayatollah do in response? I put out a post just yesterday when I said, time to think deeply. Does the Ayatollah want to risk the regime to respond intensely against Israel as a result of Nasrallah's death? Here's this is going to be a real challenge for the Ayatollah. Hezbollah was Iran's OG proxy. Of all of the proxies that Iran deals with, the 4 major ones, the Shia militia groups in Iraq, Houthis down in Yemen, Hezbollah obviously in Lebanon, and then Hamas in Gaza, they all have their own individual relationships with Tehran. There's some have more control, some are controlled more, some are controlled less by Tehran. Nonetheless, they're all beholden to Tehran for money, weapons, guidance, those type of things. But Hezbollah is clearly the OG, right? So the revolution happens in 79, and it's just in 82 where Hezbollah steps in Lebanon. Nasrallah takes over in 92. They've been going at it for a long time. They have munitions and weaponry that they've been stockpiling for decades. The leadership of Hezbollah is intertwined deeply with the leadership in Tehran. Okay, they intermarry, and just the Nasrallah's second in command's son is married to Qasem Soleimani's daughter, right? So there's familial connections here. This is a big deal, and so I don't want to minimize how much of a big deal this is. That Hezbollah is as close to on the ropes as possible. You can even make the assessment they're completely ineffective at this point. They are non-functional, and so that's a problem, and it's a problem for Iran. And so those analysts that say decapitation strikes like this are beneficial, they do hurt Iran, they do hurt their possible. Yes, that's all true. Okay, it is all true, but that doesn't mean that Iran is going to go away. That doesn't mean that the Ayatollah is going to give up his seat in Tehran. But he has to respond. He has to balance this reaction. He has to be able to demonstrate that what Israel did in a response to October 7th in Gaza is one thing. But then when they killed Haniyeh, the leader of Hamas, that was an escalation in the eyes of Iran. Now they went after and they killed Nasrallah, and didn't just cut off the head in that sense, right? Didn't just cut off the head of Hezbollah. They eviscerated the top 30% of all of the leadership. It's bad. And so Iran cannot respond in the way that it did last April and take a stance, send a message. They can't do that. So they have to go further. They have to jump up another rung on the ladder. How are they going to do that? I don't know. It's possible that they can do something similar like they did last April, and then they'll just shoot more munitions. Maybe they double the amount of ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, one-way attack drones that they sent last April. Maybe to try to overwhelm the Iron Dome, David Sling, and the Arrow system. Possibly something that they could think from a tactical perspective to really send a message, right? But at the same time, the Ayatollah is like, listen, I'm not going to go in and completely eviscerate Tel Aviv, right? I'm not gonna shoot 300 ballistic missiles at Parliament, and kill all of the political leadership in Israel to really show them we mean business, right? That's not going to happen because they know, and the Ayatollah knows, that's a red line that Israel is just not going to accept, right? At that point, you're going on full on conventional war, and the Ayatollah is in a position where he's no longer going to exist, and Iran is no longer going to exist in the state that it is today. And Iran doesn't have any nuclear weapons. Okay, that's just my take. Okay, so what are you going to do? They can't do that. So the Ayatollah is in a tough spot. They're going to react. They're going to react soon, in my mind, in my view. It's going to be a few days. But now, I just had read very recently here that the Ayatollah claimed there's a 5 days of public mourning that are supposed to occur in Iran since the death of Nasrallah and his colleagues. Sure, I can see that being the case. Wednesday, it's on, if you will. But he's going to respond. We're just going to have to see what it is. But he's not going to go too far. Okay, he's not going to go too far. Okay, point number 6. Who's the next guy? Let me bring up on the screen here. Not that picture. We'll talk about that in a minute. So here's the next guy, Hashim. I'm going to butcher his name. Safi Dain. Potentially, this is most likely going to be the replacement for Nasrallah. He's got a couple things going for him. First, he looks like the guy. If you can see it in the picture, right, he looks just like Nasrallah. He currently oversees Hezbollah's political affairs, although he has some role in their military affairs as well. He sits on the Jihad Council. That's what it's called. So when he's dealing with military affairs, again, he doesn't lead that council, but he does sit on it. And he's been on the U.S. terrorist watch list since 2017. I'm just looking at some of my notes here. Big Palestinian supporter, as you might imagine, right? Many in Hezbollah, if not all of them, are. He's a Hashemite, so he has a religious, he has a religious respect because he can claim direct descendancy from Muhammad. So that's, he has that going for him in terms of clout, religious clout, or wasta, sometimes we call it. What's he going to do? How is he going to be any different? That this remains to be seen. He's taking over. There's not as much known about him as there is Nasrallah, so it's hard to make the assessment. But nonetheless, in addition, he's taking over a complete disaster. I mean, this would be akin to like losing the president, vice president, secretary of state, secretary of defense. I mean, just imagine all of the senior cabinet members, all of these leaders, the speaker of the house, on and on and on. And then you have one of the senators from Kansas who's left, who sits on the foreign affairs committee. Right. And that's not to say that person isn't necessarily smart or capable, but now they're in charge of everything and they have to put this whole thing back together. What are you going to do? And how long is it going to take? I think anybody could be in a position where they're just like, I don't know. Right. So I don't know in particular what it's going to be with Hashem, if he's going to do something, what he's going to do differently. I mean, I can only imagine he's going to try and reconstitute, right? Fill in some roles, try to save as many lives as he can, probably back off the border in southern Lebanon in the event he thinks an Israeli incursion is coming. Potentially get some guidance from Iran. That's key. He's going to be reaching out to the Ayatollah as well as the senior leadership in the IRGC and say, hey, listen, we need some help. Just like we did in 82 when we first stood up, we're going to need some help. Can you come in? Can you help us? and get us back on our feet, it's going to be a while because they're just in a bad way. So that's point number 6 here. Who's taking over for Hezbollah? It looks like it's going to be Hashem. Point number 7, it's similar to my point earlier about Hezbollah being a political party. Okay, it's so the original group that stood up prior to Hezbollah after the revolution in '79 was the Islamic Resistance in Lebanon, the IRL, and that was a militant group specifically focused on counteracting Sunni Muslims, Jews that live in Israel, the West, whatever, but particularly with a focus on Lebanon. But what they wanted to do in the very, very beginning is they wanted to create a political entity where they could operate within the political system in Lebanon and they could garner more support that way. Instead of just being the tough guys on the block, they wanted to be able to provide services. They wanted to be able to provide education. They really wanted to take a hold of the state resources that were available, at least in part, in Lebanon, again, to get stronger, more powerful, more wealthy. And they did that by creating Hezbollah. And Hezbollah eventually got to a point where they were like nearly 33%, about 1/3 of the legislative branch. And they had enough seats in parliament in order to block certain laws that were being passed by the greater legislative branch and then eventually never made it to the president for signature, or rather the prime minister, because they are in a parliamentary system. But nonetheless, so Lebanon has an opportunity here to retake some of that control. We may see a rally around the flag effect by some of those that are supportive of Hezbollah and will remain so. I mean, there's been thousands and thousands of people who are currently mourning in Lebanon, again, across the Middle East, at least in the Shia regions, and in particular. But there's also many, many, many that are happy. They were partying in Syria, they were partying in Beirut, because Hezbollah are just a bunch of gangster thugs that help some people to garner, again, respect and wealth and other things. But there's a whole boatload of people that just don't want to deal with Hezbollah, and they don't support their mindset. They don't support the killing of innocent Israelis by firing at random rockets all over northern Israel. They don't support those things. And so could we see a rally around the flag effect where some individuals in the legislative branch will be replaced by Hezbollah members, or they can lose a bunch of power? I foresee it being them losing some authority, really. I mean, even if the belief is that those that don't support Hezbollah, but maybe they're in a neutral stance, they just don't want anything to do with them at that point because they don't want to die. They know that they're the absolute target for Israel right now. And why would you want anything to do with them if you're looking to survive in any way? So if you're a Christian or a Sunni, or who you were not interested in supporting Hezbollah in the first place, fine, you're not doing that. But people on the fence, potentially not doing it as well. So we, again, optimistically, let's hope that we have a return to some strength and authority with those Lebanese politicians that have been trying to do so when Hezbollah was still around. Okay, so point number 7. Let me make sure I'm counting right here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Got another 7 here. I did it twice. Okay, let's do 8 here. As a response, is Israel going into Lebanon? I think, without looking at all of the intelligence and all the things that are potentially out there, and I'm sure the IC knows, right? I'm only speaking for myself here off the top of my head and based on my personal opinion and experience. But, I would take Prime Minister Netanyahu at his word at this point. He's made pretty clear in the media over the last few weeks that there are 60,000 Israelis who are internally displaced, that they've removed from northern Israel because of the rocket attacks that have only increased over the last few weeks. And so when Prime Minister Netanyahu says he's going to go and finish the job, whatever that means, he's going to, whatever it means in his mind. And he said it again at the UN just yesterday and Friday. Said it again. It's going to go all the way to the end. And one of his key lines of effort is returning Israelis to northern Israel. You can't do that unless you completely get rid of all of the munitions and weaponry in southern Lebanon. You can't do that unless you create some type of a buffer zone. Now, in order to do that, you have to use ground troops. As I said earlier in this little extra episode here, I'm not saying that that's the smart move politically. I'm not saying it's the smart move diplomatically. He's probably going to really upset the United States and some of the other allies if he goes into Lebanon now that he's done what he's done with Nasrallah. But by doing what he's done, it doesn't give him the opportunity to return those Israelis to the north. So I would just say, Prime Minister Netanyahu has made a lot of things clear since October 7th. He's made a stand. He's even having pretty significant pushback from some of his more powerful allies, to include the United States, and he just keeps going. I mean, there was just conversation last week about a potential ceasefire, at least to try and get the citizens of the U.S., Britain, and some of the other allies, right, get the people out of Lebanon and the innocent Lebanese too. Let's not forget that. Get the innocent Lebanese to move north so they don't have to deal with this, this conflict, this combat. And it was reported that Prime Minister Netanyahu was very close to saying okay, and then 24 hours later, he kills Nasrallah. Okay, I don't think the United States was really prepared for that, and it wasn't what was in the plan. Let's put it that way. At least as the way Prime Minister Netanyahu said it. So belaboring here, but I would trust Prime Minister Netanyahu's word in this moment, at least when he makes claims as to what he wants to do. I don't have a reason to not believe him at this point. So I think it is the case they'll likely end up going in some fashion. Now we'll talk in future episodes and future videos or whatever about what the end state of that is. I don't know. I don't even know if the Israelis know at this point. If they know they're going in, how long are they going to stay? How far are they going to go? What does that all look like? I don't know, but they'll come up with a plan before they do go in. But I don't know if anybody really knows at this point. All right, let me check. Let me check a couple more things here. I said that was 8, right? Let's go to 9. So this picture here that you'll see on the video here that's just popped up, this is caused an issue with the optics when it comes to the United Nations and the United States. And this famous picture now is claimed to be the photo taken when Prime Minister Netanyahu was making the call back to Tel Aviv or wherever he was talking to and whomever he was speaking with to pull the trigger, if you will, on the Nasrallah strike. And afterwards, the United States came out and said they had no idea that Prime Minister Netanyahu was going to do what he was going to do in Israel. It was going to conduct the strike. First of all, let me say that's 99% most likely true. Right? Israel is not in the business, and I've discussed this before, and other countries in particular, even our closest allies, they're not in the business of telling us about their most secret operations in the beginning. They know Washington has leaks. They know all of those things happen. Okay, so it is. I'm sure that this operation was planned. The pager operation was planned. All of these things were planned and they were executed. Now, was there a potential phone call from Prime Minister Netanyahu to the president while the the fighter jets, the fixed wing aircraft were on their way to Lebanon to conduct the strike? Maybe. I don't know that, but is there a courtesy call at that point? Potentially. But in terms of actually knowing what's happening prior to the operation, before anything can change, Israel's not in the business of telling anybody. But back to the picture, it doesn't mean it doesn't provide bad optics. Netanyahu just gets done with presenting a pretty strong speech. He often does, but this one was particularly strong. At the UN, half the room walked out, but he gave the speech nonetheless. He returns to a hotel room in Manhattan or wherever he is, and a photo is taken, and then hours later, Nasrallah is killed. Right. So there's an optic here. There's a vision that the United States and the UN, at least tangentially, are responsible in part for what happened in Nasrallah. And they're responsible in part for the devastation that's occurring in southern Lebanon, for the innocents that died in those 6 buildings on top of Nasrallah and his cronies. And so this could potentially raise the threat against U.S. troops and others, but for our interest here, U.S. troops across the Middle East. We know we have troops in Iraq. We know we have troops in Kuwait. We have them in other places. And the proxies, as we discussed before, they're going to be interested in responding to Israel. That doesn't mean they're going to leave out the others that are related to Israel in some sense. And if they can use this photograph as a foundation, as an example of how the United States is equally complicit with Prime Minister Netanyahu, then the potential for increased threat against troops is there. And so we've seen it in the past. This isn't, don't have some oracle here, right? We've definitely seen U.S. troops fired upon at Al-Assad or Bil, other places in Iraq by the Shia militia groups. It certainly is the case. And so who knows if it will happen, but the threat has certainly been raised. In particular, this photo isn't doing anything to help anybody in terms of the security for U.S. forces downrange. Okay, so we'll certainly be watching out for that. And then the last thing that I want to mention, so point number 10, and I hope that I did my counting here properly. I've spent yesterday and today not only speaking here in the videos, but talking about through other social media outlets, Twitter in particular, about the fact that Hezbollah is a terror group and all of the things that they have done that are wrong, clearly. And losing Nasrallah is a good thing for the world. He was a bad guy who hurt a lot of people. Okay. But what we have to remember, if we're going to be fair, what we have to remember is that not everybody feels that way. And we can argue about whether someone is right or wrong about it, but it doesn't take away the fact that other people think differently. I'm just going through social media, reading news media reports, just based on experience. There are millions of people out there that really don't like Prime Minister Netanyahu. There are millions of people out there that think Prime Minister Netanyahu, in particular, is just as evil as Hassan Nasrallah. Now, again, I'm not saying it's true. I'm just saying there are a lot of people who believe that. And whether we want to argue about it online and we talk about it here on a video and go, that's not true, Nasrallah is a bad guy, that's not changing anybody's mind, right? So people are going to live in Gaza, people are going to live in Beirut, people are going to live in Tehran and Iraq and Kuwait and all over that are going to, they don't care what we think, right, about how evil Hassan Nasrallah is. The people in southern Lebanon who are represented by the 30% in the legislature, by Hezbollah's 30%, who do provide medical care, they do provide services, they do provide food, social welfare benefits. Those things are true. Yes, they're also terrorists and they kill people, but they also do those other things. And so they've been able to garner a respect. And, when I use the word terror, I want to make sure that I also make something clear here. Hassan Nasrallah, in particular, is not Osama bin Laden. What do I mean by that? Yeah, they're both, ideologically, religiously motivated, who are interested in potentially killing, innocent people in the name of their God and whatever. But they're not the same, and they're different in a lot of ways. First, if you go back and you read what Hassan Nasrallah said, he actually didn't support 9/11, right? Now, I'm not saying this because I think Nasrallah is a good guy, but nonetheless, that's a difference, right? He didn't think that was a good idea. He didn't think that the people that were working in the towers that day had anything to do with what bin Laden claimed they had to do with. Okay. Osama bin Laden was kicked out of his own country after the Gulf War. He tried to protect Saudi Arabia. He thought he could from the United States as they were going to push the Iraqi army back into Kuwait and potentially get, and protect Saudi Arabia. The Americans wanted to protect. The king eventually chose the Americans and kicked bin Laden out of country, and he left. He said, listen, just because you can fight in the caves of Afghanistan doesn't mean you can protect us. And bin Laden wasn't a political figure. He didn't provide services to anybody. He didn't have a political party in a country that held 30% of the seats. He didn't provide social welfare programs to people like Hamas does, right? As bad as they may be, they do that for some people. As bad as Nasrallah may have been, he does that for some people. Okay. That's not bin Laden. And so we just have to, in order to assess these complexities in the right way, we just have to remind ourselves that whether our moral right and wrong isn't necessarily the same moral right and wrong of everybody else. Okay. And so it's going to be, a challenge. Right? I mean, quite literally, everyone but what North Korea came to our defense, at least morally, after 9/11. I mean, quite literally, the whole world hated bin Laden. And the same can be true for the leaders of ISIS. Everyone hates ISIS because ISIS hates everyone, and everyone hates ISIS. That's not true with Hezbollah. It's not true with Hamas. And so we just have to remember to keep that in our calculus as we're thinking about these complexities. Okay. Bear that in mind as we go forward. So, all right, there's our 10 points, things I want you to consider now that we're in this position. I know I don't normally throw in these extra videos, but listen, what's happening in the Middle East right now is things are changing. It's a high threat, clearly. Okay. Israel is making decisions that to kill certain individuals, bad guys, no doubt, kill certain individuals, but also wiping out nearly an entire city block to do it. Right? And it's creating escalations one after the other. Now, you can ask yourself at this point, and it's a rhetorical question because who knows, but what did Hamas and Hezbollah and others think was going to happen after October 7th? I mean, if you go into Israel and do what you did, what did you think was going to be the case afterwards? But nonetheless, that's for a whole nother topic. But the point being is that the threat levels are increased across the entire region, and decisions that may not have been made or definitely weren't made 6 months ago, a year ago, 3 years ago about the balance of power within the Middle East were not made. They're being made now. Entire governments are being changed. Lebanon's being changed. We're now having discussions about what the Ayatollah wants to do in terms of a strong enough response against Israel, but not so strong that he loses his entire regime. These are the conversations we're having. And so it's important that we get on and we have these talks, and we really try to get a good idea of what is happening, because it's going to end up affecting not only the region, but could quite literally affect the rest of the world. Okay. All right. So thanks for joining me here today. Going on for a little bit. But that's the 10 points I want you to consider. Listen, you got any questions? John Malik at headlinesinhistory.com. Reach out, leave a comment down in the video. If you're watching, or leave a comment on the podcast. Visit the website, headlinesinhistory.com. I hope these points here give you something to think about and kind of open your awareness as we're in this position. So thanks for joining me today.